G'day, welcome to another in our true crime series, and this one is about the Boer War. Straight away I think you're going to think true crime, Boer War, I know what this is about. And of course in 9th of December 1864 in Bridgewater, Somerset, Henry Harbord Morant was born. Yep, you guessed it, but you still haven't got the right answer. So, on the 1st of April, this point you think, April Fool's Day. 1st of April 1883, Henry Morant arrives in Australia, North Queensland, becomes a drover, marries a local girl, but it doesn't last long. He is a strange fellow. He's a gambler, he's an incredible horseman, he's an amazing storyteller, a bit of a fib teller. He tells everyone he's related to aristocracy in the UK, that he's the son of an admiral, and pretty soon leaves his wife, starts travelling the country, and what he's doing when he's travelling the country is telling stories, gambling, and raking up debts everywhere he goes. He's a great poet. He sends his own poems into Sydney newspapers. They love them and publish them. He starts to become more well known. And pretty much what happens is he goes to a town. Wow, the famous horseman, who's so good we're going to call him Breaker Morant, is in town. And he's partied, I guess you could say, and given hotel rooms and lives the lavish lifestyle, but he never pays a bill. This goes on for a lot. Remember, we're talking back in the 1800s. Social media doesn't exist. The newspapers tell stories how they want to tell them. Breaker gets away with a lot, travelling from town to town. But by the time of the end of the century, it's coming up to 1900, he has got warrants out in a number of places around the country. He has got a prison sentence hanging over his head, and he has come to the last refuge of where he can get away with his storytelling and debt building, and that is in a little colony of South Australia. So when he's there, telling his stories and raking up debts like he always does. In fact, at his South Australian hotel where he lived a lavish lifestyle, racked up an enormous bill, he told the hotel owner that his father would be happy to pay the bill, the Admiral in England, and to send the bill over there to have it paid. But he knew his days were numbered in Australia, and he had no reputation whatsoever in the UK. But it's 1900. The Boer War is taking place in South Africa. First contingent, South Australian first contingent's already gone to the Boer War. And so, on Australia Day, the 26th of January 1900, only just turned into the new century, Breaker decides it might be a good idea to head off out of Australia. He joins the second contingent. He's one of 6 officers and 112 men and 120 horses that board ship in Port Adelaide, and amid great fanfare and celebration head off to the Boer War. Now the Boer War, Breaker Morant, there's lots of different stories about what he did, where he went, battles he was in, people he captured. He got a bit of a reputation as being a great horseman and achieving things and a great scout, so it's all really good. Then he met a bloke called Captain Hunt, and Captain Hunt was quite a well-off guy and a bit of an aristocrat, and he was going on leave to England, and Breaker went with him back to England and had a wonderful time, because Hunt was infatuated with Breaker Morant. He thought Breaker was a heck of a character, believed what he said about his family connections, and he was a bit of a patron, I suppose you could say, of Breaker. So Breaker had a great time. When they came back to the Boer War, which was still going on, when they came back, they joined the Bushveld Carbineers. We're now in February of 1901, and this was a group bordering on mercenaries, I guess, that were going to go to where the last of the fighting was taking place with the Boers, and it was nasty fighting, and the last of the holdouts of the Boers. Desperate stuff. And what happened when they got there is they found that the rules were a bit slack, there was not very good oversight, and so, hard to describe in a few words, but it was pretty tough for any Boers that were caught. And then they found out where one of the Boer leaders was. Hunt led the expedition to get this Boer leader. He wasn't a very good military man. He decided to go to the hut where the Boer leader was and was shot and killed almost instantly. Different stories about how this affected Morant, because you've got to remember the man was broke, he had nothing, he couldn't go back to England, and he found that his benefactor, the man that worshipped the ground he walked on, Hunt, was shot and killed. This sort of tripped Breaker over the edge, you could say, who was already drinking too much. And what happened then is, you've got to remember that Breaker came to Australia when he was 19. When he was 36, he set off to the Boer War. In those years of 16, 17 years in Australia, he was worshipped. People thought he was fantastic. They loved him. More people loved him than had debts owing to him. And here he was in South Africa, and he was a no one. He was never going to be anyone because he had no title, he had no money, he had nothing. Whatever caused this, Breaker went over the edge, and it's a fact. There's lots of arguments about what happened, but it is a fact that a number of Boer prisoners who had surrendered, who'd given up their arms, were shot and killed. In the field court-martial was held by Morant that he had no right to do. Shot prisoners he shouldn't have shot. A priest who witnessed some of the shootings was murdered. Circumstantial evidence, massive circumstantial evidence that Morant was responsible. The end story of all this is that, yes, Morant and two other officers, Picton and Witten, the three of them were charged with murder, and there was a trial. We're slowly getting to the true crime. What is the true crime? And that's because they were charged with murder. There was going to be a court-martial for the three of them. There was an officer, Major Thomas, from Tenterfield, New South Wales, and he was a lawyer. Now, he wasn't a very good lawyer. He didn't want to be a lawyer. He was more interested in writing stories and editing a newspaper than being a lawyer. But he was so convinced of Morant's innocence that he took on the case of defending Morant. They were tried, as I've said, tried for a number of murders in this court-martial, and the lawyer, Thomas, didn't do that good a job of defending them. And Morant himself, who was arrogant and so immured by his own legend, it is recorded in the court records that at one stage when he was asked what happened, he said, "We had to enforce Rule 303. They say it in the movie, they say it in books, but he really did say it. And Thomas, in his memoirs, Thomas, the lawyer, says he was devastated when Morant said that to the court because it was as if he was signing his own death warrant. Long story, okay, found guilty. What happened while the court case was going on? The court case was taking place in a couple of places. It was taking place at Pretoria and it was taking place at Petersburg. Let's not go into why it was taking place at two places, but at one stage while it was taking place at Petersburg, those three officers I've named, Morant, Picton and Witten, were in their cells when 300 Boers attacked Petersburg. When they attacked, they released 150 Boer prisoners, 450 of them. Things were a bit dire, and so those 3 officers weren't only released from their cells, they were given 303 rifles and ammunition, and it's okay, we'll keep it going. They were given rifles and ammunition. They helped defend Pretoria. They fought, and not only that, one of the 3 saw some enemy, told the artillery where the enemy was. Artillery fire was sent to where those Boers were, and it was a successful artillery barrage. After they were beaten off, the 3 men were put back in chains and put back in their cells. If that's not enough, when they were moving between the 2 towns, they were on a train. They were handcuffed, and then the handcuffs were shackled to the floor of the carriage. The train stopped. It was because they believed the Boers were about to attack the train. Those 3 officers had their shackles removed from the floor, their handcuffs were taken off, they were given loaded 303 rifles and went to help defend the train. Then they're all found guilty. Then they're sentenced to 2 of the 3 are sentenced to death by firing squad. And now at last we come to the true crime. Because if Thomas the lawyer had been a good lawyer, and if he'd had facilities where he could research the law, he would have known that on the 4th of March 1832, the Duke of Wellington brought out condentation, which is if a prisoner performs an act of extreme duty or heroism or patriotism, that prisoner will be pardoned of his crime. If a lawyer had said how those men had twice been taken out of their shackles and imprisonment, been given rifles, and in one instance had physically fought the Boers, there is a very high likelihood they could not have been sentenced to death and may well have been pardoned. On top of that, lawyer should have known that those men shouldn't have been shot until the Governor General had okayed the decision to shoot and kill them. That's the true crime. A poor lawyer and a better lawyer might have got them off. So in February 1902, the axe falls, so to speak, and Breaker Morant is shot and buried in an unmarked grave. And there's a little bit more to that story about Breaker's dog tags, some other time maybe. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you say a comment, say something, and subscribe. Cheers, thank you very much.